testosterone and its role in identity.
On August the 2nd, 1848, a German zoologist, Arnold Berthold, decided to see what it was that made cockerels crow, strut about, and generally act like the cock of the walk. He began very directly. He operated on 6 young cockerels and removed their testicles. He left 2 of the cockerels like that. History doesn't record what happened to their testicles, but they turned into ordinary capons, castrated cockerels with which farmers were familiar. Of these animals, Berthold records that they were not aggressive, fought with other cockerels rarely and half-heartedly, developed a monotone voice, their combs and wattles became pale and underdeveloped, their heads remained small. And the other cockerels? In 2 of them, Berthold reimplanted one of their own testicles inside their body cavity, near the intestines. In the other 2, he swapped the testicles over, implanting one cockerel's testicle into the other's body. It made no difference. All 4 of these cockerels developed as normal, uncastrated fowls. They crowed lustily, often engaged in battle, showed the usual reaction to hens. Their combs and wattles developed normally. When he opened them up, Berthold found that the testicles had attached well inside their bodies, but mostly weren't producing sperm. So there was something else those testicles were making that preserved the maleness of the cockerels. Without knowing it, Berthold had stumbled on both the science of hormones, endocrinology, and on the idea of a male hormone, testosterone. And he'd ignited the idea of an elixir of maleness, which is still with us today. This is the story of testosterone, of how it was discovered, how it's been used and abused, and how what we make of testosterone can tell us what we're imagining about men. The importance of Arnold Berthold's experiment wasn't noticed immediately. In fact, the idea of hormones is a bit counterintuitive. They seem wasteful. Hormones aren't directed at particular tissues. They're released into the body, and then only certain tissues will react to them. On the face of it, it does seem weird that testicles would continue to do their masculinizing work on cockerels without being attached to any of their usual nerves or sinews. But over the course of the 19th century, the hormone theory began to gain acceptance. And at the same time, interest in isolating this masculinizing agent increased. There had been a long-standing belief that it was sperm which gave men their masculine powers. In 1869, the Mauritian physiologist Charles-Eduoard Brown-Séquard gave a lecture at the Paris Medical School stating that if it were possible to inject semen without danger into the veins of old men, one would obtain regeneration in intellectual work and physical powers. He shared a belief, common at the time, that masturbation in men dispersed that vital semen energy, and so would result in diseases and weakness. But perhaps, thought Brown-Séquard, you didn't need the semen itself if you could isolate whatever it was in the testicles that was doing the masculinizing. So, over a period of 15 days in 1889, at the age of 72, Brown-Séquard injected himself with extracts of ground-up dogs' and guinea pigs' testicles. And, he claimed, the results were almost immediate and very striking. After the injections, he said, "Experimental work at the laboratory tires me very little now. I am able, to the great astonishment of my assistants, to remain standing for hours without feeling the need to sit down." So what was going on? Treatment with ground-up dog and guinea pig testicles isn't common these days, so you might suspect that there was some psychosomatic or placebo effect involved in Brown-Séquard's sudden energy. Medical experts at the time thought roughly the same, and said so in the strongest possible terms. A German medical journal called Brown-Séquard's claims senile aberrations. An American medical writer said the idea of a rejuvenating treatment was as old as stupidity, wicked as superstition, cruel as savagery. It is false in its premises, false in its logic, false in its conclusions. So you might have thought that there'd be little call for Brown-Séquard's treatment, that under the weight of this laughter it would have sunk without trace. But you'd be wrong. In fact, Brown-Séquard was inundated with requests for his treatment from elderly politicians, writers, scientists, and other well-known men you might have expected to know better. There are reports that the novelist Émile Zola was injected with Brown-Séquard's testicular extracts in 1887. Zola was 47 and wanted to keep up with his 20-year-old mistress. Brown-Séquard's testicular fluid became so popular that he had to take on lab assistants to make it and had to limit the supply to only 1,200 doctors in France. Which is astonishing, because the general consensus among scientists now is that whatever he was injecting into these elderly men almost certainly did absolutely nothing. And testosterone wouldn't be chemically synthesised until 1935. So, when people take testosterone today, how many of the changes they perceive are biochemical, and how many are just what they expect to happen? And as men have more testosterone than women, the Brown-Séquard testosterone question, at its root, is the question, how many of the differences between men and women can be accounted for by our hormones, and how many are just, well, made up? Joe Herbert is Emeritus Professor of Neuroscience at the University of Cambridge. He's written extensively about testosterone.
In the male, it's produced mostly by the testes. A little bit comes from another gland called the adrenals. In women, it's produced by the ovary, but because the amount is much smaller than the testes, the amount coming from the adrenals is proportionally greater, so about half in half in women.
What is its function in the human body?
It begins with a very simple function to enable you to reproduce. We're talking now about males. First of all, it activates sexual behaviour, so it makes a man want to have sex. And secondly, it enables his fertility, because without testosterone, the testes can't make sperm. But that's the essence of what it does. But to do it, it has to do much more than that, because males live in a competitive society, and therefore testosterone has to make them aggressive, competitive.
What effect does testosterone have in women?
That's been recognised from about 1960 or so, and that came from some rather strange cases in America where, for medical reasons, women had both their adrenals and their ovaries removed. Now, that helped their particular condition, but what it did also, it almost abolished their sexual desire or libido. And when people began asking why that was, they found that it could be restored by giving them small amounts of testosterone. It's the principal hormone for driving libido or sexual desire in women.
Because we believe that testosterone is the male hormone, even though women have it in them.
It's not the male hormone at all. It is hormone for both sexes, but of course it has a major role in males, not just as adult males, making them sexy and fertile and aggressive and competitive, but it starts much earlier than that, in the womb, because at the age of about 10 weeks or so, a gene on the special Y chromosome, which only men have, makes a testis. And that testis makes testosterone. And that testosterone acts on the brain. And the effect on the brain is lifelong. So when they're born, they have this male-like brain, which sits there waiting until puberty when it's reactivated by the post-pubertal surge in testosterone.
People have been trying to regulate masculinity for quite a long time, haven't they? People have been castrating men. Can you tell us how that worked and what happened in the body?
Castration has been recorded in human history. It's about 2000 BC. The Sumerians used castration. In ancient Chinese culture, the only good way for a lowly born man to rise in the hierarchy was to be castrated, because he then became a eunuch. He was trusted. He didn't have a family. He didn't have ambition to create a dynasty, to supplant his superiors. He was just a willing, faithful servant.
So we've been talking in the programme about Brown-Séquard. Is there any chance that what he did actually worked?
No. He was a great man. And as he got older, he realised some of his abilities were fading away, as they do. And he concluded this, largely from Berthold's experiments, that this might be due to testes. So what he did was he ground up a lot of testes, mainly bull testes, and injected them into him. And he wrote a paper where he said, within a few days, I'd recovered my vitality. It was a wonderful example of what's called the placebo effect, actually, because the testis, funnily enough, contains hardly any testosterone, because it makes it and chucks it out immediately. In order to get a decent dose, you need to take about 1 kilogram of testis, which is certainly not what Brown-Séquard did.
In the world, we may see that men and women behave quite differently. Let's say we can see that, I don't know, in the media or in people that we know. How can we know how much of that is because our hormones are different, there are biological differences, and how much of it is, in essence, a placebo effect? We are told that we're supposed to behave differently, and therefore we do.
Well, as you know, there are two camps on this. There are the camp which says the whole thing's cultural, really, you know, and because you're a girl because you're told you're a girl. Now, there was a famous psychologist called John Money, who in the 1960s, 1970s, thought that. He thought that gender identity, for example, was because your parents treated you as a boy or a girl. There was a famous case in Canada where one of a pair of twins lost its penis during circumcision. And so they consulted John Money, and he said, very easy, remove his testes, remove what's left of his penis, make him a vagina, put him in a pink frock, and he'll turn to a girl. What happened? It didn't happen. They tried very hard. When the child was about 17 or 18, he converted back into a boy. In fact, subsequently, rather sadly, committed suicide, actually. Now, we know that biology is important because of an extraordinary event which occurs rather rarely, and it's called the androgen insensitivity syndrome. In order to understand it, you have to know that hormones have to have a receptor. So testosterone is secreted by the body, but the body only knows it has testosterone if it has a protein molecule called a receptor, which both detects testosterone and makes it work. Endocrinologists usually talk about a key and a lock, you know, same thing. Now, there are some so-called males, XY males, who have a mutation in the gene which makes this protein. So although they have lots of testosterone, they are entirely insensitive to it. What happens to them? They're born looking like, feeling like, and being like women. They are absolutely normal women, except, of course, they haven't got a uterus, and so they can't have children, and they don't menstruate, therefore, they don't have periods, but they are psychologically and physically and culturally females.
Thinking about testosterone, now it's widely available. It was first synthesised in the 1930s.
1935, yes.
And how did they do that?
Well, it was Adolf Butenandt and also another researcher called Ruzicka. First of all, they extracted testosterone or other steroids from lots of testes, got from slaughterhouses.
So bull testicles, not human testicles, no.
Bull testicles. And then what they did was they did a whole series of biochemical studies to try to understand what the structure of this compound was. And this was part of the discovery of what are now called steroids. Then, of course, the chemists could get to work and make it. And shortly after that, Butenandt and Ruzicka synthesized testosterone, which was a huge step. And for that, they received a Nobel Prize.
And how did they use it?
They decided that in a situation where you had or were thought to have low testosterone, you could replace it with high levels of testosterone. This is what they did. That's gone on. The prescriptions for testosterone have tripled in the last 10 years.
Huh. And has there been a tripling of people who have low testosterone disorders?
That's a very good question. And it's much debated in the medical literature. Is there such a thing as andropause, for example? Do middle-aged men drop off? Well, they do. I mean, there's no doubt about it. As you get older, most things go down, including testosterone. It goes down to a varying degree in different men. And the question is, does it matter? Because most men actually have more testosterone than they need. But there is clearly a demand for it, particularly in the United States. What the effect has been is hard to judge, because there are not that many follow-up studies, really. Let me tell you something else interesting about testosterone. It's highly labile. It changes in a male. And what changes it? Well, being aggressive or receiving aggression. If you're a top dog, then you're likely to have high levels of testosterone. If you're down at the bottom of the rank, you have low levels. The cause and effect is two-way, because it may well be that if you have low testosterone, you aren't as competitive, but also, if you're subjugated by a stronger and bigger male, down go your levels of testosterone.
Now we have synthesized testosterone.
Biochemists and pharmacologists have developed derivatives of testosterone. Usually they're not natural derivatives which are longer lasting or more potent or whatever, and these are the ones which are normally given now.
When a trans man begins treatment with testosterone, what happens inside the body?
Well, of course, he has not had testosterone during early life, because in the uterus he's a female and he will lack that. So some of the effects of testosterone will be different from those of, in quotes, normal, unquote, male. Testosterone does a lot of the things that he would like to happen. He grows a beard, he grows body hair, and he looks very much like a male. In fact, the conversion of females to males is actually very successful, appearance-wise.
There are many people around the world who have gone from having low levels of testosterone in their bodies to high levels. Transsexual men have a unique perspective on what happens when your testosterone levels increase enormously. Freddie McConnell is a video producer at The Guardian. He's a trans man who writes on LGBTQ and equality issues.
When I sort of realised this is an option for me, I felt euphoric and excited, but also really scared, because I knew then that I was going to have to make a decision.
How do you take testosterone?
I've always injected it. It's intramuscular, so it goes right into the muscle, so you need quite a long, thick needle, because also the substance itself is quite thick. It's kind of like olive oil, consistency of olive oil. And then you can either have it in 3-month intervals. It can vary by week, depending on your body and how your own system synthesizes it. Or you can have monthly/3 weekly injections.
Okay, so $64,000 question. First of all, how has it changed your body?
I suppose the biggest overall change is like body fat redistributing. You can feel that you're losing fat under the skin, and your skin is becoming kind of tauter and rougher. I still kind of notice changes like in my hips and shoulders broadening out, although I should say at the same time that your bones never change. So any kind of growth that you see is either muscle or the illusion of growth because of the redistribution of fat. Hairier all over. My voice dropped gradually over a couple of months, and then after a year it had settled. I completely lost the ability to sing or like hold a note for a while. Smellier, increased sex drive. The whole experience feels like going through puberty again.
When we hear on TV about young trans people, we might think, oh, they're giving testosterone to children, but that's not actually what's going on.
No, children aren't prescribed cross-sex hormones. As a rule, on the NHS, they're not. You have to be at least 16, I think, and it's very rare before people are 18. But if a trans child is so absolutely adamant that they are trans and that they cannot go through the puberty that their body is trying to go through, if you take hormone blockers, that can be a lifesaver until they are old enough and sure enough and confident enough or whatever to make a final decision. Once they go off the blockers, their natural puberty will kick in and they'll be fine. The doctors and the families involved in looking after those kids have the best interest of that child at heart. I knew when I was a child, but as soon as I started having messages of that's wrong, that's shameful, that means you're ill, that means you're a freak. I shut up about it. That's what caused the problem, not the fact that I was a kid and I didn't know my own mind.
There was a point at which you were wary about taking testosterone, and then you became sure. Can you say what it was that made you think, yes, definitely this is the right idea for me?
I was trying to socially transition in order to show the gender clinic that this was right for me, and show myself that it was right for me. Once you start down that path, it accelerates exponentially, and I very quickly realised that transitioning without testosterone was horrible. And it's important to say here that like not every trans man transitions with testosterone. There are plenty of people out there who don't feel the need to take it. But this is just me. For me, I felt like that limbo period was horrible, and I just was like adrift, and it wasn't the answer. And so like, yeah, I needed to. That's when I realised like, oh, this isn't really an option. Actually, I realise now. Testosterone is absolutely essential.
And then some trans people do decide to have surgery, and some do not. Can you talk about what your choices were around that?
Yeah, I started wearing a binder way before taking testosterone, and the first day I got it was like the last day I'd never wore a binder. Like I wore it every single day after that, and so I knew quite early on that top surgery, which is what it's kind of colloquially known as, more formally known as like a double mastectomy with 3 nipple grafts, was definitely in my future at some point. And then my mum said that she would come with me when I travelled to the US to have it done.
Tell me if this is not a question that you want to answer. You're not planning to have below the waist surgery?
Lower surgery. Those procedures, whether it's a phalloplasty, which is a creation of a penis, or metoidioplasty, which is kind of using what you have already, which is enlarged by testosterone to create a smaller penis, and you have testicle implants for both procedures, I think, actually. They're really, really complicated multi-stage procedures, and yeah, I'm just still figuring that out. And I've never experienced dysphoria around that area of my body particularly strongly. It's funny because that's something you're kind of led to believe that you should feel. I think there was a sense maybe 5 years ago that if you went to a gender clinic you wouldn't get treatment unless you went in a complete wreck, hating every single part of your body. As I've taken testosterone and I feel more comfortable overall, I realised that I need to make that decision about further surgery just for me, and not because of any kind of social expectations or definitions of a man. I feel like I can unironically say at this point that it doesn't take a penis to make you a man.
It seems like one of those questions, actually, which the more you look at it, the more it dissolves. What is a woman? What is a man?
Yeah.
Well, on some level, this is important to us, but we're not sure if we can say anything further about what it is than that.
I feel like I can use multiple words to describe me. I'm trans and I'm a man. I'm not either or. And I'm gay. And my gender expression is quite masculine. You know, all these different words, they kind of sound like the same thing, but they're not. They have their own nuanced meanings, which are useful in certain situations. So we should be conscious of when we're using them and when it's proper to use man versus male.
So have there been any downsides to taking testosterone?
The whole thing that testosterone does for you is it doesn't make you Hulk. The testosterone itself doesn't make the changes. The testosterone unlocks your genetic potential for masculine secondary sex characteristics. Your body can only use a certain amount of testosterone, and that amount is different for every individual. So if I was to be frustrated with the slowness of my changes, I might be tempted to take more testosterone, but that would be counterproductive, because what happens then is that there's kind of free testosterone in your system, and somehow it converts to estrogen. And that's the same thing can happen to bodybuilders who take anabolic steroids. That's where they might develop sort of man boobs and that sort of thing. It's a very tricky balance to get right, and that's a process that you go through with your endocrinologist, is getting those levels right for your body. Make sure you're not on too high or too low a dose, because if you're on too low a dose you might feel tired all the time, and again your changes might come in slower than they otherwise would. So yeah, you become more aware of that sort of thing, and I think there's a risk sometimes that you can become hyper aware of it, and you might kind of, that's not healthy either. You know, you don't want to be kind of obsessing about what your body's doing.
What does testosterone mean to you?
I love being on testosterone. I don't think I'd be here without it. It's fantastic. It's this really crucial but relatively small part of my life. And I forget about it, and that feels like a luxury.
We know that gender is more complicated than what genitals you happen to have. Freddie's very clear about that. But is it also more complicated than the hormones in your brain? Professor Joe Herbert.
The fact that many trans males feel that they've been locked in the wrong body right from an early age might very well be because their brains, for whatever reason, have been masculinized. In fact, it has to be that, because that's what gender identity is. It's a masculine view of yourself. So the question is, are people that trans from female to male in their heads because of something has happened during uterine life? No one knows that. The problem here is the brain. When I meet my students, I say to them, I'm a professor of neuroscience, but I know very little about the brain. And they all laugh and think I'm being modest. I'm not. I'm being truthful. The brain is the last area of really very considerable ignorance about the human body. We know lots about what it does. We can describe what it does. We know rather little about how it does it. And that goes for gender as well. I can't tell you in the brain what makes someone feel female or feel male.
Well, there we have it. Arnold Berthold found out how to restore combs and wattles to capons. He turned them back into cockerels by reimplanting testicles into them, unwittingly giving them back their testosterone. It's more complicated for human beings. Brown-Séquard and Voronov thought they'd found an elixir of masculinity, which seemed to be as effective as Berthold's testicle implantation. But all they'd done was to activate the placebo effect, in which the expectation of increased virility made men behave in a more virile way. Gender has something to do with biology. It has something to do with expectations. It takes in culture and society. The nuances of gender can be refracted by stress, altered by belief, emphasised by other people's reactions. And as to the effects of testosterone on the brain, as Professor Herbert says, we just don't know enough about the brain to know for certain what testosterone does in there.
Science Stories was presented by Naomi Alderman. The programme featured Professor Joe Herbert and Fred McConnell and was produced by Colin Grant. In midweek, in a moment, Libby Purvis is joined by Nick Yaris, a man who survived death row, Katie Munnings, the 18-year-old rally driver, the reporter and writer Tom Mangold, and Professor Vanessa Toulmin of the National Fairground Archive. But before that, a word from Ritila Shah about what's coming up at 10.
Hello, Kate. Tonight, MPs have voted to back the government's plan to start formal talks on Brexit by the end of March next year. And they've supported a Labour motion asking the government to publish its options for Brexit. But we hear from two MPs, Conservative and SNP, who still voted no. Also, we have a report from northern Iraq on the battle to retake the city of Mosul from so-called Islamic State, and a rumour, a hashtag and gunfire in Washington, D.C. What is Pizzagate? We find out, and we ask who'll be performing at Donald Trump's inauguration in January. That's all coming up on The World Tonight at 10.
Thank you, Ritila. All information that I'm sure we're dying to find out. But now, it's midweek, presented by Libby Purvis.
Hello, from the circus to death row, from the rally track to the rackety days of 1950s tabloids and the sober world of panorama, all human life is here. We have Katie Munnings, rally champion at 18, a driver in very top gear, Tom Mangold, the legendary investigative journalist, Nick Yaris, who spent 22 years innocent on death row, and Professor Vanessa Toulmin, academic archivist and practical promoter of circus variety and all retro entertainment. So let's just check out the response to circus and fairs of the rest of you. Tom Mangold, are you ever want to run over the circus?
I'm old enough to remember Chessington Zoo and Circus, going right back to the 50s when it was a circus without animals and lots of clowns, and one used to laugh.
So you kind of ran away to journalism, reporting, but you could have run away to the circus. Would that have ever appealed?
I don't think I have an act good enough for the circus, unless people think Panorama's a big laugh.
Katie Munnings?
Oh, I love the circus, yes. It was a big part of my childhood. I used to go with my grandparents and get all dressed up and go down to the park and watch it. It's so magical, isn't it? I really love it, yeah.
Nick Yaris, when you're freed after so long, I would imagine any big noisy gathering would be terrifying for you.
No, I loved it. I went and saw a small circus with all the music to the Beatles behind it. And I never saw that before, where a circus had a musical theme through it. So I really enjoyed that.
That was Cirque du Soleil.
That is.
Cirque du Soleil's Beatles show. It's a great show.
Really brilliant. Really brilliant.
The great thing about you like circus of all sizes, don't you? From sort of tiny one on a farm to Cirque du Soleil.
Yeah, I love all circus. To me, it's like jazz. It's a continuing form of entertainment which changes and evolves. And it's just, to me, circus is life.
Well, let's start with Katie Munnings. Brilliance and enthusiasm about cars and driving is not confined to middle-aged men with bad genes and a creepy line in macho banter. Katie is only 18 and has just won the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile Ladies European Rally Championship.